At 5:10 a.m. on April 22, 2025, three American missiles tore through the morning sky, heading straight for a forbidden forest deep inside Russia. There was no declaration of war, no roar of aircraft, and no public warning, just the silent, hypersonic arc of three rockets. A response written in speed, secrecy, and steel, delivered from the heart of NATO territory to the doorstep of the Kremlin's most dangerous new alliance. The target was a secret that had consumed the U.S. intelligence community for weeks. It began with a ghost, a pattern of rail movements and encrypted signals traffic from Russia's Far East to its western military district. Satellite imagery soon gave the ghost a form: 15,000 North Korean troops, not raw conscripts, but the 7th Elite Artillery Corps, handpicked from Pyongyang's most loyal units. They had arrived under the veil of a new fraternal defense pact, but their deployment to the Kursk region, just 130 kilometers from the NATO frontier, was an act of deliberate escalation. Their mission was not to reinforce the crumbling lines in Ukraine, but to open a new front, a strategic terror campaign aimed at the alliance itself. The centerpiece of this threat was a dozen Coxswain M 1978 self-propelled guns. These massive 170mm artillery pieces, relics of the Cold War but brutally effective, were hidden within a dense pine forest under a multi-layered canopy of radar-absorbent netting and thermal camouflage. Each gun could launch a 130-pound shell over 60 kilometers, a range that placed US F-35 bases in Poland, critical ammunition depots in Romania, and even the flow of supplies through NATO's eastern rail hubs squarely within their crosshairs. The intelligence coup that sealed their fate came not from a satellite, but from a signals intercept. A Russian communications officer, operating near Belgorod, had transmitted preliminary targeting matrices to the North Korean battery commanders. The data packets included coordinates for a U.S. Patriot missile site in Rzeszów and the rail junction at Przemysl, the main artery for Western military aid into Ukraine. This was no longer a proxy conflict. A nuclear-armed rogue state was actively preparing to strike U.S. forces. The assessment from the Pentagon was grim. If the first shell lands, it's too late. The response must be preemptive, precise, and undeniable. The order, signed at the highest level, was not for an invasion, but for a surgical excision. The weapon of choice, the M142 HIMARS. From a concealed forward operating position near Rzeszów, Poland, three launchers, disguised within a logistics convoy, received the encrypted execute command. The crews, who had been drilling for this exact contingency for months, moved with a calm, lethal efficiency. In under 3 minutes, the systems were aligned. The targeting data, a constant stream of GPS coordinates and imagery from a stealth RQ-180 drone orbiting silently at 60,000 feet, was verified, and the launch sequence was initiated. Three M30A1 guided MLRS rockets lanced into the dawn. Each rocket, a relatively modest $150,000 instrument of destruction, represented a fundamental shift in warfare. Their solid fuel boosters propelled them to Mach 2.7 on a high arc trajectory, their path optimized to stay beneath the coverage envelope of Russian long-range radar. They were guided by jam-resistant military-grade GPS and inertial navigation systems, with their final targeting coordinates tweaked by the drone's real-time video feed. They were not just dumb rockets. They were intelligent, networked rounds on a one-way mission. 84 kilometers away, in the quiet of the Kursk forest, the North Korean crews were at their most vulnerable. Confident that the depth of Russian territory was their shield, they were conducting final loading drills. They had neglected to deploy short-range air defenses. Their nearest protective radar unit was 12 kilometers away and not yet synced to their network. They were a hammer, believing themselves to be in an armory, unaware that an American scalpel was already moments from striking. The strike unfolded with brutal mathematical precision that left no room for reaction or regret. At 5:10:58, the first rocket reached its terminal phase. Instead of impacting the ground, it detonated in an air burst 14 meters above a parked ammunition truck. In a microsecond, its alternative warhead fragmented, releasing a cloud of 182,000 tungsten steel rods. This hypersonic shrapnel storm saturated an area the size of a football field, shredding the truck, a nearby Coxswain gun, and the 7-man crew into unrecognizable wreckage. The subsequent secondary explosions of ammunition and fuel lit up the forest like a torch. 11 seconds later, the second rocket found its mark. It didn't need a direct hit. It detonated 3 meters to the side of another artillery piece. The tungsten fragments acted like a swarm of ultra-high-speed projectiles, shearing through the gun's optical sights, jamming its traversing mechanism, and cutting down the crew as they scrambled. The cannon was left intact but permanently mute, a monument of useless metal. At 5:11:28, the final rocket delivered the coup de grace. It scored a direct hit on the 3rd Battery's resupply vehicle. The high-explosive warhead detonated with catastrophic force, flipping the 40-ton Koksan gun onto its back and tearing its thick barrel open like a tin can. The crew was vaporized in the initial blast. Total engagement time, 91 seconds. The result was absolute. 3 artillery batteries destroyed, 3 support vehicles annihilated, over 20 personnel neutralized. The Phantom Fortress was erased from the battlefield before it could fire a single shot. While the first flames were still spreading through the pine needles, the HIMARS launchers were already on the move. Their 5-ton trucks sped down back roads, relocating to pre-scattered hide sites long before. Russian counter-battery radars could even begin to triangulate their point of origin. To the bewildered Russian commanders, the attack seemed to have come from nowhere and vanished just as quickly. The aftermath sent political shockwaves that dwarfed the physical destruction. In Moscow, the incident was met with a furious, silent humiliation. All further deployments of North Korean artillery to the Western Front were halted indefinitely. The units, once hailed as a game-changing reinforcement, were now seen as vulnerable liabilities that invited devastating retaliation. In Pyongyang, the blow was catastrophic to its prestige. The Kim regime, which had loudly trumpeted its military pact with Russia as a sign of great power status, now faced the utter humiliation of its most elite gunners being wiped out without ever engaging the enemy. For the 15,000 other North Korean troops in Russia, a terrifying new reality set in. They were not valued allies, they were expendable pawns and prime targets. The message from Washington was crystal clear and deliberately unambiguous. The placement of threatening weapons near NATO borders is a red line, and the response will be immediate, disproportionate, and executed with chilling precision. The Kursk strike wasn't a battle, it was a geopolitical correction. It redefined the rules of engagement without a single word of negotiation. It proved that in the modern era, sovereignty is no longer a guaranteed shield, and that the most powerful statements are not made with the thunder of armies, but with the whisper of a rocket's descent and the unnerving, absolute silence that follows.